Hey everyone, welcome to another weekly webinar here at Route Consultant. For those of you who I have never met before, my name is Josh Gregory. I am the director of our consulting and training teams here at Route Consultant. So work across the board. I work with buyers, helping to educate them as they get into the space and helping current contractors find ways to be more productive and keep up with current trends in the environment. So all across the board there. But for everyone who I have met before, all our regular attendees, welcome back. Whether you're brand new here or this is your 100th webinar here with Route Consultant, we still want this to be a place where we can come together, ask questions, and learn, and hopefully have a little bit of fun. But before we get to that, I just have the quick disclaimer that I have to read every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Nothing scary there. All it means is that we aren't going to be sharing any materially non-public information, but we do hope that we are giving you helpful information, helping to answer your questions, whatever it may be. And for those of you who haven't been here before, the way today's going to work, we're going to go through some content, some updates, and then in the back half of the webinar here, it's going to be a purely open Q&A. So any questions you want to bring, you can ask. The thing I would say is when you are submitting those questions, put it in the Q&A button at the bottom of the window. There's a little button that says Q&A. If you put it in the chat, I'm going to miss it. So make sure you put it in the Q&A. The other important rule for the Q&A at the end when we get there is that for us to answer your question, you have to first answer one of ours. So the question of the week this week is, what is your favorite game show or competition show? We'll be a little loose there. And do you think you could win it if you were on it? So what's your favorite game show or competition type show? And do you think you would have a chance to win it? We'll come back to that. I'll answer that, and then we'll open it up. So when you're typing in your question, make sure you first answer that question of ours. So a quick update on a couple of upcoming events that I just want to make sure everybody knows about. The first is the big one. So our large expo party in Vegas, where all the contractors from across the country will come, and it's a few days where we celebrate, learn from each other, and take time to relax before we get into the craziness in the back half of the year of peak season. So this year it's July 28th through the 30th, and it is back in the Paris Hotel in Vegas. We cover all of the food, all of the drinks. All you have to do is get there and cover the hotel. And so the link will be in the chat. So feel free to go ahead and register now, because that hotel block does sell out. And so ideally you get to stay at the same hotel that everything is happening at, so you don't have to go outside in the Vegas heat. That's the goal. Other couple of upcoming events, we have 2 upcoming happy hours. So if you want to meet our team and network with other contractors and buyers in your area, we have one coming up on May 11th in Seattle, and then one coming up May 18th in Chicago. So if you're in either of those areas, you can jump on our site, register, we'll be there. It'll give you all the info on where to meet us. And then the last reminder, we do have our next new investor summit in person in Nashville, and that's on Monday and Tuesday of next week. So if you're looking to try to decide if this is the right space for you and really try to vet this industry, that is a 2-day crash course where we try to teach you as much as we possibly can. So if you are able or interested in coming out to Nashville next week, there are still a couple of spots open on Monday and Tuesday. Last thing here, before we get to our content, I just want to go over a couple of the new listings that have come out this week. So we have 2 new P&D listings. The first is in Virginia, and it is 12 routes at $1,065,000. This one has a really high margin. It's got 2 managers and 3 spare trucks, and there's also some assumable truck debt. It's also something that may be SBA eligible as well. We also have another one in Virginia that's 10 routes at $550,000 with 2 managers and 1 spare truck, and also, again, has some assumable truck debt. So if you're looking in the Virginia area, we've got these 2 new listings of varying sizes. So reach out to our team if you have any questions on either of those 2. Okay, so those are all the updates, admin. So today I have brought Leah Nelson on to join me as my co-host. So Leah is our Director of Production and Compliance and just generally an expert at all things valuations and financing. So she's going to give us an update on the financing options for the space and the current market conditions around all of that. So Leah, if you want to go ahead and jump in, I will kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. So glad to be back. I've been on a couple webinars and I just love coming every time. As Josh mentioned, we'll be talking about financing for FedEx route, all the different options, traditional, more a little bit more creative, and what each of those entail and kind of how easy it is to do each of these things in the current market. So first and foremost, we've got your more traditional banking paths. I would consider those SBA loans and conventional loans are going to be those kind of more traditional lending options. Many people lean towards one of these options when they're purchasing a FedEx route initially. So I'm going to start by saying, just kind of prefacing this whole conversation with right now, with both SBA and conventional lending, interest rates are higher right now than they've really been in quite a long time. I think I've worked here for about 5 years. I think these are about the highest that I've seen them. And it seems that it's going to continue this way for a little while. I don't see those declining really anytime soon. So, let's just say money is not cheap right now if you're going down a traditional path, really any path, but particularly the traditional path. So, with these higher interest rates, approval rates are declining a little bit from what we've seen. Businesses that would have supported debt at a lower interest rate can't support the debt at the higher interest rate anymore. So we're seeing a couple more declines than we used to. It's making it a little bit harder to fund routes through the SBA and conventional paths. Like I said, we're going to go over some creative ones a little bit later, but I did want to go ahead and just walk through some characteristics of SBA and conventional, if it's something you're interested in, or you have a business that really fits these qualifications and can get through lending. Like I said, it's harder to get them, but it's not impossible. There are certainly businesses and buyers that can get SBA and conventional lending. So I will go ahead and say with both of these paths, particularly the SBA, we recommend looking at certain types of businesses to increase the likelihood of approval. So first off, I would say whole businesses are much easier to get financing for if you're purchasing an entire business, not just a partial business. So partial sales or carve outs, as you'll hear us say, they're more difficult for a couple of reasons. So the bank relies on tax returns to understand the financial performance of the business, of course. So with the carve out, the tax returns are not representative of just the business and the sale. So they're representative of the whole business and not just the portion in the sale. And so banks need to see carved out financials, as we call them. So it's split from the tax returns into multiple pieces representing each of the pieces in the sale and outside of the sale. These can be made. Sometimes, that being said, certain banks want them to be CPA created, certified, reviewed, any of those different things. And not all CPAs are capable of doing that retroactively. Splitting FedEx financials can be a little bit of a challenge and it can be really expensive, but making sure if you are purchasing a carve out, speaking to lenders that can do those, like I said, not all of them can, is really, really important. So making sure you're having those conversations early with lenders. Like I said, it's if you're looking at a whole business, that's going to be generally a much less complicated process. Another factor to look at is the price and the multiple of the business. So over the years, like I said, I've been doing this about 5 years. I've seen around up to a 5 times multiple get approved by the SBA. However, that was a long time ago, a couple years ago. With the interest rates were way lower than they are now. So if you're looking to get a loan now, I would recommend looking at businesses around 4.5 times multiple or less. Really, the lower the multiple, I would say the higher the likelihood of getting financing. Another thing is that all of these apply really to both conventional and SBA loans. I want to make sure that's clear. But you want to make sure you're purchasing a business with the right documents available. I think that kind of goes without saying here, but both SBA and conventional lenders, they'll require the last 3 years of tax returns, year-to-date financials, which includes a P&L and a balance sheet, normally less than 60 days old for those year-to-date financials. So making sure that you're looking for businesses that are able to provide those documents in a timely manner. Making sure they're not going to take 6 months to get a year-to-date P&L, which is, it happens sometimes, but making sure you're able to get those documents in order and that they make sense too. They're not terribly complicated, or maybe, if they have a lawn care business that's mixed into, sometimes that can get a little bit complicated. And it's also really important to make sure the margins on the historical financials support the purchase price. So the business may be performing well right now, it looks really great, it's optimized, it's all those things, it's got really great margins. But if it's had poor performance over the last 2 to 3 years, it can be challenging to get those businesses approved. So make sure that you're really investigating that. Because banks base their analysis on the last several years of performance. Normally the last, I would say, year to 2 years and the year-to-date financials are the ones they're really going to hone in on. And they don't put as much emphasis on like how the business is performing at this exact moment. So unless there's been some type of substantial change in like the structure of the business, they're going to look at those last like 2 years of financials. If you are interested, kind of getting more specific into SBA here, there are a couple things to be aware of. Like I mentioned before, interest rates are pretty high right now, and that certainly applies to the SBA, no doubt. Most 7A loans have a rate of prime plus 2.25%. And currently prime is 8%. So 7A interest rates are around 10.25% at most SBA lenders that we work with. And in most cases, that's also a variable rate. So those are just some things to keep in mind if you're looking to go down the SBA path. SBA does have a 10-year term, which is generally longer than other financial institutions. So your monthly payments may end up being lower than if you went down a conventional path, despite the higher interest rate, just because it's got that longer term, but do expect those higher interest rates with the SBA. Also, again, if you're going through the SBA, they place a heavy emphasis on business performance. So making sure that you're looking at a business that really checks all the boxes that I spoke about a moment ago is really crucial, because they're going to place a lot of heavy emphasis on that historical performance of the business. The down payment for the SBA is generally a little bit lower than conventional lending as well. They have a minimum down payment in most cases of 10% from the buyer. Depending on the strength of the deal, they may ask for more than 10%, but 10% minimum is the standard. So that's how much you would expect to put in on an SBA deal. But of course, the more money you put down, the easier it can be to secure a loan. So if you've got 30% you can put down and you want to go down the SBA path, that can really, really help. Conventional loans look a little bit different than SBA loans. With conventional loans, I would say lenders place more emphasis on the buyer qualifications than the SBA does. They still want to see qualified businesses with enough cash flow and things like that to support the purchase price, but they're looking for financially stronger buyers than the SBA. So someone with, more assets, better credit score, all those types of things. They're generally looking for higher down payments as well. They're going to want to see more than that 10%, so closer to maybe 20 or 30%. With conventional loans, interest rates they're a little bit lower than the SBA. I would say they're between 7 and 9% right now, roughly. Some can be a little bit less, some can be a little bit more, but that's going to be your rough range right now. But conventional loans do have shorter terms than the SBA. It's normally about 5 years. Sometimes if you're lucky, you can get 7 years if you have a really good relationship with the bank, or you're a really strong buyer. And then when looking at conventional loans, we usually recommend speaking with those local banks in your area. Many conventional lenders only approve buyers that live or operate really within a certain radius. So they want to see people that are relatively close to the bank itself. Like I said, it can help to get an approval if you have a prior relationship or a history with the bank getting a conventional loan. And as a buyer as well, as you're getting your loan documents together, I always recommend getting those together ahead of time. So really like earlier in the process, make sure you've got 3 years of your personal tax returns, your W-2s, a resume, and a personal financial statement. There's some really great personal financial statements templates online. If you just Google it, the SBA has a really, really straightforward one, and we use it. I use it all the time. I send it to people if they need one. And if you already own businesses, you'll need to gather your tax returns and P&Ls for those businesses that you already own. That's something that they're all going to ask for. The banks may ask for other documents than that, but getting those as an initial loan package for yourself can be really helpful and make the process go a whole lot smoother from the outset. But I want to reemphasize, like I said, those are the traditional paths that we're seeing they're a little bit more difficult to get approved loans on now than really before. So it's challenging right now in the market, but there are other creative strategies that you can use to cover the cost of a business. One of the really big ones is of course, seller financing to fund part of the business. We did a webinar, I think it was 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, on this topic, exclusively on this topic. So if you want to go check that out, go to our YouTube channel. It's on there. I won't go through all the details of that, but just to reiterate a couple of points from that. Seller financing can be a great way to supplement, a cash purchase or a traditional loan. Interest rates are negotiated between the buyer and the seller, but they're typically lower with seller financing than a traditional lender, which is great as a buyer. And then the seller's also making some extra money from the purchase as well. The terms can vary. Again, they're going to be negotiated between the buyer and the seller, but I would say most seller financing has an amortization of 5 to 10 years, somewhere in that range, and then there's a balloon payment. Normally, like I said, sometimes around year 3 negotiated, maybe year 4, but That's how we see them structured pretty commonly. Like I said, keep in mind with seller financing as well, you can use it in conjunction with a traditional loan if you choose to do that. It's considered part of your down payment as a buyer, so it can really help if you need to kind of fill a gap. If the bank will only finance 60% of the purchase and you have 20% as a buyer, you can maybe do 20% seller financing. So there's some ways to use it with that. Or like I said, you can use seller financing in conjunction with cash. That can be really great as well. Another financing alternative or something to use kind of with seller financing in conjunction with all these other things is assumable truck debt. So this can be a really excellent way to finance a purchase without going through financing. You basically have financing without going through financing. So, kind of in this example, let's say a business is priced at $1 million. The fleet has $300,000 of unpaid debt. As a buyer, you could assume that debt instead of having the trucks paid off at close, and then there's only a $700,000 gap that you have to come up with to fund. And let's say in the same scenario, if a seller does 20% seller financing, that's another $200,000 that you as a buyer don't have to pay up front. So in this scenario, you'd only have to come up with $500,000 to close the business, which is way better than $1 million. It's half that. And then interest rates on truck debt are normally, I would say, lower again than typical financing institutions. But I will go ahead and say too, we normally, as at Route Consultant, we do ask this question before we list a business, how much assumable truck debt you have. So we normally know that information from the outset. But before you assume that all the truck debt is assumable, make sure the seller checks that it is actually assumable. In some cases, the lending institution won't let a new buyer assume it, but in some cases they will. So definitely check that out before you use that as your solid plan. Where you put too many eggs in that basket, make sure that you can actually assume the debt. Like I said, interest rates right now are, they're pretty high with the current market conditions. So we encourage using creative financing strategies. Anytime that you can use assumable truck debt, seller financing, and cash, like it's going to get the deal done quicker. Everyone's going to be a whole lot less frustrated, and it's just going to be a whole smoother process for everyone, all around. Sometimes you can't avoid the traditional financing institutions, but sometimes you can, and that's great. So I would say if you have questions about a specific deal that you're working on, maybe, some strategies that you want to run by or like see what it would look like at different banks, we're happy to help with that. We know a lot of lenders in the space that you can speak with, or we can connect you with, or what have you. So any questions about that, we are always happy to help. And that's really the overview that I've got.
Perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that, Leah. And a thing we say all the time is just, one of the ways to get your best banking, best financing option is to have multiple options.
Yes.
Because, if you're only going down one path and that path fails and you have to start over, that can be one of the most difficult things. So vetting multiple banks, talking to the seller about seller financing and assumable truck debt, trying to make sure you have laid out all of your possible options is often one of the best ways to make sure you've got a successful path to close. And I would just reemphasize again, seller financing for both buyers and sellers right now is better than it's ever been in terms of incentives. For sellers, it helps you hold on to that higher price because sometimes you have to sacrifice on price just because a bank can't fund it. Whereas if you can use seller financing to close a gap, it'll let you hold on to what the business is really worth and you get the interest rates. Whereas for a buyer, if you can get a 7% interest rate on seller financing versus a variable 10% rate from a bank plus the origination fee, seller financing is extremely attractive. So, lots of reasons to think about it. It's just in the current environment when interest rates are high, we all have to be creative to make these work. And so we wanted to lay out a few paths, and it's always worth exploring multiple options in the process.
Yeah, backup plan A, B, C, and D.
That's right. Yeah, and like Leah said, we're happy to help you find alternate paths wherever we can. So that is it for the content. We're going to go open it up to Q&A, but as a reminder for everybody, the question of the day that we need you to answer before you submit your question is, what is your favorite game show or competition type show, and do you think you could win it if you were on it? So before we open it up to Q&A, Leah, I want you to answer that question first, and then I'll give my answer.
Absolutely, Josh. I think we might have the same answer here. We'll see, but hands down, Survivor. It's my favorite show. I've watched it. I don't make plans on Wednesday nights. Catch me in front of my TV at 7 p.m. I love it so much. Everyone who knows me is like, it's the only thing on my bucket list. But I'd love to go on. I think I could win it. I really do. I'm pretty strategic. I don't love being outside, but I could deal with that for the thrill of gameplay.
Yeah. Well, and the game's shorter now too, and so a lot more of it's gameplay versus surviving. So I held that as one of my options. I knew you were going to say it. I knew that it was a question for you, Leah. This is the game show choice. Yeah, Survivor is definitely one of my favorite shows. For those of you who may have heard about it, known that it exists, and never gone back to it, this is a show that I didn't watch for forever, and I came back to and watched it, and it is easily the best reality game show on TV. But the other one I really like, well, I guess first, I don't know how I'd do on Survivor. I think I would enjoy it and enjoy being competitive. I don't necessarily think I would win, but I'd still want to do it. It's such a, it's one of those things. Another one though is Taskmaster. If you've never seen it, I really wouldn't be eligible to be on it, but it's basically just, they just take comedians and they give them a series of tasks that they all have to do. And they're always ridiculous tasks, but also often the tasks have like a really creative way of doing it. And the people who figure it out, it's always really interesting. It's hilarious. It's easy, quick watches. I don't think I'd be very good at it, but I don't think anyone on that show is there to be good at it. They're just entertaining to watch. So
That's fair. I'll have to check that out. I've never heard of it.
yeah, you can watch them all on YouTube. They're free. It's a British show, so it's hard to actually watch. Yeah, but other than that, let's open it up to pure open Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, we can jump into it. It can be either about anything that Leah talked about today, or anything about the FedEx space at large, anything about market trends, anything anyone has, we're here for. This is open time for anyone, so we can stay as long as you want, but we're not going to force you to ask questions. So if anything comes out, we'll be here. As a reminder, just while we're waiting for the questions, if you missed it at the beginning, we do have a series of events that are coming up in different areas in the country. Those are in the chat if you go to those links. So we have happy hour coming up May 11th in Seattle, and a happy hour coming up in Chicago the week after. So a couple of those, and then the expo in July in Vegas. Let me see if I can think of any questions to stump you while we wait, Leah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't. One thing I would say, well, actually, here's a question, and maybe you can expound on it, Leah. What does the financing process look like? So, you talked some about, the things you need to have prepared in advance. So what are the steps that they can expect once they've found a deal and taken it to the bank? Are there certain hurdles that they have to expect from a bank? Are there certain things to listen for that are good indicators that the deal is actually going to close if the bank's happy?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, like you mentioned, you want to be talking to in the initial process a couple of banks. So I would say first and foremost, do that. That most of them are going to have a really similar process. So you meet a bank, you like them. You submit all your buyer documents, like I mentioned before, all of those, and then you gather the seller documents as well. So I would say, like I said, tax returns, P&Ls, and then for FedEx, settlement statements, all of those different documents. And like I said, we'll assist with that if you're working with us. I help assist gathering the seller documents and things like that. And then the bank will do really an initial review of the business. They'll look at the basic financial information, basically say if they think it's something they can finance or not. I will say a lot of banks at that point will say that they can do it. It's not that early on is not always a guarantee. So I do want to throw that out there. Sometimes they'll say yes after an initial review, and you go farther down the line and it doesn't always pan out, but they will give you an initial kind of like, yeah, we want to proceed, or no, we don't. And that is when they'll start gathering more advanced documents, start asking more questions. They'll go through credit and underwriting, both of which take a couple of weeks. And that's really where, as a buyer, they'll ask you more things about, details on your tax returns. They may ask you for more documents and more things like that. I know from a seller side, they certainly do that. They'll ask me about nearly every single expense on the tax returns. And sometimes that process can take, some time to really dig into those financials and understand what's going on. So like I said, that process of going through after that initial kind of look at it, going through those details can take a couple of weeks, a couple of months, sometimes, depending on how quickly we get documents together. Like I said, they'll ask for some follow-up documents and things like that. And then you'll move, once it's been through credit and underwriting and it's been approved, it will move really into the closing process, where once again, you have to gather even more documents. Title, they'll want to see titles and all kinds of details there. And again, that takes a couple of weeks as well. So there's a couple of phases from the bank's perspective. Like I said, we help with all of those things. all in all, I would say the whole process can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months right now.
Yeah, and you're always waiting for to ask the question, is the bank clear to close?
Yes.
If you can get that yes, then you're at least, there's a decent chance that you're actually going to close. Obviously, there's all these little things that can happen, but that if they say yes to that question, you should be, in theory, good to go from the bank. The other thing I would say, just as a general recommendation, if we haven't mentioned it already, when you're trying to decide which bank, one of the biggest criteria is, have they done a FedEx deal before? If they haven't, then there's a really good chance that they'll tell you that, yes, we can definitely fund the deal. It's going to be great. And you don't find out all the way until it's in credit that, they're not interested at all in the deal. So lots of the front end people you'll communicate with the bank are almost more of sales types.
Yeah.
And so if they haven't done a FedEx deal before, they'll be really gung-ho to take the deal. They'll look at your financials and be happy. But I would be cautious if they've never done a FedEx deal and not spend a ton of time going down that road.
Agreed.
Quick question here from Alfred. Will there be any events up more in the Northeast from us this year? We do have one in Philadelphia on June 1st. So that's the next one I would say. But we had one in DC a couple weeks ago. It's not really the Northeast, but it's closer than some of the ones out in Phoenix and Vegas. So yeah, the Philly one on June 1st is probably the one I'd point to for you. Next one here is from Mona, and it's basically, are there certain steps to be approved by FedEx? So, I won't go into infinite detail here. There's lots of different branching questions you can ask here, but the basic process when you are going to purchase one of these businesses, or just to go through something called Build a Ground Biz, which is where you take an open territory, is that you will submit an RFI, a request for information. It's basically a combination of a resume and a business plan that FedEx will ask for, where they want to kind of get to know your history and why you think you'd be a good fit for this role, and explaining kind of your business plan for the territory around safety and customer service. And beyond that, there's a couple of other documentation type things you have to have. But when you submit that, you'll go in for an interview. And if FedEx approves you in that interview, those are the main FedEx hurdles, really. There's a lot of, there's a series of admin steps and things you have to do before you get to the close date. But the main approval hurdles on FedEx's end are the submission of the RFI and being approved in the interview. And then from that point there, you're basically working towards getting your business and yourself set up to be ready to go and operate on day one. FedEx doesn't really have an on-ramp and a training, any kind of training wheels. They expect you on day one of stand-up to be ready to go as an operator. So you're really trying to spend that time between the interview and the stand-up date, getting everything possible that you can ready to go, so that when you operate, you've got your trucks, your employees, all of your vendors ready to go and operate. All right. So next one here is from Mike. So his answer to the question today is Wipeout, and yes, he could probably win.
Ambitious.
Yeah, Wipeout's one of those shows where it's like I can tell myself I would win, and then just one random slip and you immediately lose, and you're on the highlight reel of people who have fallen and slammed face first into the water. So his question is, if they're working with us on one of our routes for sale, do we typically help with guidance through finances and working directly with the banks? I'll let you answer that one, Leah.
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly help with that. I kind of alluded to it before, but we definitely help with the seller side of things and the business side of things. I think is where we provide a little bit more assistance. As a buyer, it's a little bit easier for you to submit your documents directly to the lender that you're working with. But except from a seller side, I'm happy to gather the tax returns and make sense of them and answer all the questions the bank has, based on the financials and all those types of things, and really navigate that process, with the buyer and with the seller. So yes, absolutely happy to help with that.
Perfect. Yeah, it is something we try to do everything we possibly can. There's a certain amount that, bank will only want to talk to you about certain questions, but anything we can answer, any documentation we can provide, anything we can do in that search for a bank and the right financing path, we are trying to do for you.
Yeah.
All right. Next one here is says their favorite show is Jeopardy. Said they think they could win as long as there's no questions on 18th century French literature or art. I think you might be able to avoid those categories. It's pretty Oh, hopefully that's enough. I would just say that I would lose on Jeopardy. So it sounds like you're much more confident there. So good for you. The question is, they've been talking to some brokers, looking in the line haul space, and they're hearing that sellers aren't as interested in doing a seller's note because there isn't as much there in the way of collateral other than the trucks. And so it makes the seller note more challenging. That is true to an extent. There are sellers who will want some kind of additional collateral or some kind of security guarantee or promissory note, which are all different kinds of documents that we can work through and provide to help secure that collateral and help secure that seller's note. Sometimes that is necessary, sometimes it's not. It's the same way there are some banks that will require additional collateral, like the SBA typically requires you to sign your home over as collateral when you do one of these loans. And some, there's many conventional loans that won't. So it just depends on what the seller's comfortable with and what they aren't. And that's going to just feel the same way as financing through a bank. But on the whole, I would say that we are still there. Most of our deals do have some percentage of seller financing. And right now we are pushing sellers to do more, just to, like I was explaining before, open up the financing options for their deals and for you as buyers. So while I would say, you're not going to guarantee to have 50% of every deal financed through seller financing, it is still an option that should still be pursued. And sometimes there may be additional collateral questions that are a part of it. All right. Next one's from Daryl. He said, Survivor is his favorite show and he would have a good chance to win. So
we're going to compete, Daryl.
Yeah, Route Consultant Survivor and see what happens. So he said, is the approval easier, harder, or the same for P&D versus line haul?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say probably about the same, as it really just depends on the business more than anything. You're not gonna, if they're both unprofitable, you're gonna have a hard time getting it approved. If you have a really strong P&D business or a really strong line haul business, that's gonna make it a whole lot easier. So I would say not really specific differences between the two types. It just depends on the strength of the business itself. That being said, with line haul, if it's a completely leased fleet, sometimes that can make it a little bit more complicated because there's no assets for the bank to back up. And that's just when you're going to want to make sure that the net income on that business is really, really strong. So I would say beyond that, there's not too many differences.
Yeah, that's definitely the hardest part when it comes to line haul is a pure lease fleet. Sometimes banks will understand that the lease payments mean that there's no CapEx to factor in the future. And so sometimes that can help, and you can explain that story, but it does complicate things a little bit when you're looking at financing. Next one here is who wants to be a millionaire? Not a chance they'd get it, they said. And I feel you on that. I think I'd probably end up missing one of those questions where I stare at and watch myself on repeat answering an easy question wrong forever and missing the $1 million. General question is just, can we assist with an LOI, or do we need to hire an attorney for that? So two different things there. So if you are one of our consulting clients that we're helping through the buying process through acquisition strategy, we can help provide, whether it's an offer template or an LOI template to you, whether it's our deal or externally. If you are buying one of our deals, we could still provide either an offer template or an LOI template for you to use. Typically, we don't do LOIs as a part of our normal process, but if you want to use one, we do have the templates. It's not something that you would have to go draft on your own if you're buying one of ours. You could if you want to, but the base template's there to kind of cover all the language, and you're free to adapt it however you want, but we can help with that process. All right. Let me see to make sure I'm reading this question right. So his answer for the show is Wheel of Fortune. Might be able to win as long as he's not competing against his wife. I understand that anything with words or spelling, my wife destroys me. So I would also not want to compete against my wife on something like that. So his question is, he was talking to a broker about the line haul business. And the first question the broker asked was how he planned to fund the sale. And he was talking about financing. And the broker basically responded that they're only looking to engage with people doing cash offers and reach back out if you're interested. So what I would say is hopefully that wasn't one of ours. We're specifically not trying to answer that question because we know bank financing is a path, and it is. I have seen other brokers, other companies basically say that they don't want to spend the time or energy to help walk through the banking process. That's why we make a big deal about explaining what this process looks like and saying that we have a team of analysts, we have a team that interacts with banks, because we do want to help you through that financing process, because we recognize that not everyone has $1 million in cash ready to spend on this deal. Or even if you do, you don't necessarily want to deploy all of your cash capital on a new acquisition. So we are never going to make that statement. It's always fair for a seller or a broker to say that. If they don't have the resources or team to be able to go through the financing process, it just basically makes it easier for them. They're willing to wait for a cash offer. It's always in their right to say, but I intend to make the commitment that our team does not. We always want to try to help you find that financing path, whatever it is. All right. Man, another challenger, Leah. So they may win Survivor, but not on the same season of Survivor that I play. Yeah, so I think we can send out this. That's something we'll give the marketing and events team as their new challenge, is to go ahead and start a Survivor show for us and anyone who joins the webinar. So we'll start sending out submissions. You can send in your interview.
Fantastic. No more road shows, only Survivor.
Yeah, only Survivor. Yeah. So they said they've got a deal where they want to seller finance the whole thing, including the trucks, but then turn around and lease the trucks to us. That seems strange. They want to double pay for the truck. Have you seen this before, Leah? And it might need some clarification, but how this could make sense?
That I've never seen it, so I'll preface by saying that this is a new structure. I would say rarely do we see sellers that want to seller finance a whole deal alone.
Yeah.
And then so they seller financing. I'm trying to wrap my head around it while I'm sitting here.
Yeah, it seems like what they're saying is they're seller financing the whole deal, and I assume that the whole deal is inclusive of the trucks.
The price of the trucks.
And then they're leasing the trucks back, so it's an additional lease payment on top. The only way I can see that making sense is if the lease payments on the vehicles, were not a part of the original calculation. It's additional. This is one that it would probably make more sense for us to have more context to be able to really help you out on that one. It does sound strange. It does sound like there's something either we're missing or doesn't make sense, but there could be some context that would help. So feel free to reach out to the team. Just email us directly and we'll see what we can do to help. All right, another one here. So from Nate. So Price is Right would be a lot of fun to go on. Doubt I'd win, but it'd be memorable. Yeah, that's one that even if you just get to go on it, you're basically a part of history at that point. So yeah, I agree with you there. So his question is, what are our thoughts on the contract language modifications? So those are things that I know that they've come out, and I just haven't had the time to review them yet. So that is something that I am, I've kind of got on my schedule for this week. We'll review them. We'll comment on it. Most likely either, in some kind of comment marketing wise this week, or just on the webinar next week. But that is something I'm actively reviewing. So more to come on that, Nate. So it's a question a lot of people have. You're not alone on that. All right, next one on how much can I negotiate a route for sale? Based on the asking price that I see, is it fair to negotiate? I'd say yes. Any of these deals, both sides expect some amount of negotiation. The level of that is really going to depend on, a few different factors. One, are there multiple buyers in the deal? If there's competitive offers, multiple people vying for it, you're going to have less leverage to negotiate as a buyer. There also may be scenarios where the seller has no time pressure, where they can stay and wait for the offer they want for as long as it takes. So you can negotiate there, but they just may not be interested at all in negotiating. And then there's also scenarios where the seller has a huge time crunch, where they have to sell like in the next week or two. And so you're going to have a lot more leverage there. They're probably going to be open to whatever they need to do to make it work. in general, I would say if you're within 10% of that asking price, it's usually a fair negotiation point. If you're coming in lower than that, the main thing I would tell you is, so as not to, offend anyone, you want to make sure you have a good story or context as to why that's the price you're offering. And if you can do that, if you've got, something that makes sense there, then you're fine. What you don't want to do is just come in and offer half price and just hope that they negotiate from there. A lot of sellers, if the offer's too low, just won't even look at it, especially if there's no context or story around it. This one is another one for you, Leah. I don't know if you know the number off the top, but what percent of deals are carve-outs? What percent of deals are carve-out seller financing, I think is the question. And how much of a shift are we seeing to seller financing? I could answer the second part, but I guess what percent do we still see carve-outs that seller finance, I guess is the first part of that question.
Yeah, that have carve outs at seller finance. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that's a place again that kind of makes more sense to do seller financing as opposed to kind of like I mentioned, a whole deal, because you generally have fewer other financing options if you're doing a carve out, and so it makes sense to do a little bit more seller financing on those deals.
Yeah, I would agree there. Yeah, anyone where the bank's going to ask more questions and make it take longer is great if you can cover more of it with seller financing. The bank is going to be a lot more motivated to move forward if they only have to fund 40% of the deal as opposed to 80%. The other thing I would say is, we always pushed for at least 10%. It's always been something we've pushed sellers to try to accept on the seller financing side. But we are seeing as much as 20%, 30%, 40% with some deals right now in the current environment so that we can get the deals done. It's not a guarantee, but there is a shift in that direction. All right. And I think that is the last question I'm seeing. I'll give it like 10 more seconds if you want to type another one in. Other than that, thanks everybody so much for coming out today. We always like doing these webinars, trying to answer any questions you have. If there were questions that you didn't get the time to ask, or you wanted to ask more in private, you can always reach out to us directly. Those are things that we can talk on a one-off basis for anything like that you need. For everyone else, again, thanks for coming, and hopefully we'll see you at one of those events in person. I love getting to be on these webinars, and you all get to see me, but I don't get to see you. So I like to actually come to those events, get to meet you all there, and you put a face to a name and a question on these webinars. So hopefully we'll see you at one of those soon. And for everybody else, we will see you again next week on the next webinar. So thanks everybody for coming out, and have a good rest of the day and week.